I'm Gene Chavez, historian in residence at the Kansas City Museum. I particularly like the title of this section, which is From Immigrants to Neighbors. And I think that it's important to know that Kansas City has attracted, like many cities around the U.S., many immigrants to our city over the years, especially during the early 1900s, as immigrants were fleeing Europe, as other immigrants were coming from Mexico to engage and work in the railroads and the packing houses and other labor-intensive jobs that were offered here in Kansas City, and especially during the period of World War I, when there was a labor shortage across the nation, and particularly here in Kansas City, as industries began to grow. One of those immigrants who came here in 1911 was Juana Frausto-Castro. I'm going to say that again. Juana Frausto-Castro. She was born in Mexico, in the state of Guanajuato, and she came along with her husband and family to the west side of Kansas City, Missouri. The west side had been occupied by many different immigrant groups, and one of the reasons why the Mexican people settled during this period especially during the period of 1910 to 1921, when the Mexican Revolution was taking place and displaced many Mexican people to flee the effects of the war. And as they came, they found abundant work here in Kansas City in those industries that I mentioned. Juana Castro was especially influential in the community where she settled on the Kansas City, Missouri's west side. She was a person who gave much of herself as she worked with the Guadalupe Center. Dorothy Gallagher was a head of a Catholic organization of women that started an organization that eventually was called the Guadalupe Center and still is today. The organization is over 100 years old. I think it's right at 103 years old now that the organization has been in existence, and Juana was one of the individuals who started to help start that organization. She was not only a mother and a friend and a person who was willing to lend a hand to help the community. She was also a curandera, which we call a healer, and she also practiced the midwifery, where she could help the neighbors who sometimes did not have access to hospitals to birth their children. She was also known as someone who was able to help women deliver their children safely. So Juana had a great impact on Kansas City, Missouri's west side in the early days of the settlement of Mexican immigrants there. Another couple on the Kansas side that I'd like to talk about is Francisco and Catalina Nieto. Catalina's parents had originally come from Mexico and settled on the Kansas side of the Kansas City area in a community that is known as Armourdale. She and her mom and a couple of the aunts ran a boarding house in the Armourdale district of Kansas City, Kansas. Now the young man that you see in the picture is her husband, Francisco Nieto, who came from Mexico as well. His story is very intriguing. He left Mexico after both of his parents died. He stayed a while in Mexico as a 13-year-old kid. He stayed with his his sister in Mexico, but his sister eventually got married, and he decided that he was going to take off and join the revolutionary effort on the side of Pancho Villa. And so he served as a water boy for 3 years with the army of Pancho Villa, the Army of the North, as they struggled to gain equal distribution of land and other things to better the lot of the people of Mexico, the poor people especially of Mexico. After a while of fighting with, or at least providing provisions for Francisco Villa, or Pancho Villa as he was called, he decided that he would go and stay with his sister in California. And he went and stayed with her until his later teens. And as he became restless in California, he said, I just want to travel the country. So he started traveling the country, working his way as work opportunities afforded themselves. And then he heard about Kansas City, and in Kansas City he found ample work, and he started working in the packing houses, meat packing houses that existed here. And while he was in Kansas City, he met his future wife, Catalina, and he proposed to her. She said, well, let's wait a while. I'm needing to go help my uncle who just recently got married, and his wife doesn't know how to cook, so I have to go help her learn how to cook. And so she left to go up north to Chicago to help her uncle with his new bride. And he couldn't wait too much longer, so he purchased her wedding gown, purchased a dress for her mother, and went and fetched Catalina and brought her back to Kansas City. They married in Our Lady of Mount Carmel Church, which is no longer here because of the '51 flood. And they lived happily ever after with lots of children and making great contributions to Kansas City.